ETM Hotel Rennie Sean, welcome in peace. My name is Sean. I'd like to thank everybody for tuning in to the Kofi Pie Side Research Team. I like the show, share the show, tell a friend, tell a friend. We're part 6, dealing with the legacy of Nzinga. I do want to say peace to the chat, peace to everybody that'll catch the replay. I see Teddy in the building, Keenan in the building, Miss Althea in the building, Nunu in the building, Tika in the building. What's good, everybody? How y'all doing? How y'all doing? Boom, he was here. I don't know if he's still here, but peace to Boom. Peace to everybody that'll catch the actual replay. Peace to everybody that's been sending messages to us. Whether it be me, whether it be Kofi, whether it be Sutek, Chavis, it doesn't matter. It don't even matter. We are reading your messages and we appreciate the messages and we're getting your points in those messages. So yeah, man, you know what I'm saying? We got people are actually appreciating what we're doing, slowing down the conversation and just dealing with the historical context and all the evidence regarding the legacy of Queen Nzinga. Now, because of this conversation and all the noise that has been created, a Facebook post has appeared in the middle of this conversation, and this person is trying to center themselves in the conversation that has very little to do with him. And so we've been getting messages regarding this person who deliberately made the post and has it set up in a way to make it look like he's asking people questions, but he's insinuating things and he's not providing any source. Zero source. He's asked to provide a source, however, he wouldn't. His post regard talks about Nzinga coming into power and poisoning a brother and little things like that he could stick with. And then in the chat, he tries to use the Met Museum for certain things and all these other things, but he hadn't read the book. He hadn't read the book. It happens every time. What up, EIE? What up, Scripture Ripples? Was good. Please like the show, share the show, tell a friend to tell a friend. As people are coming in, man, I'm gonna do what I did yesterday and try to bring people up to speed on the conversation. But more importantly, pretty much let everybody know where we stand and where we are. Peace, Kimoyo. So we listened to a video on Kofi Pie Side Research Team when he interviewed him and Sheffrin. They ended with slavery. We listened to some clips that followed up that conversation the day before. So on day 3, this conversation takes place. When this conversation takes place on day 3, it's a different tone. It's not as aggressive. Let me see if y'all can see the screen. Let me make sure the volume right. And let's see how this begins while people are coming in. Like the show, share the show, and we're gonna deal with some things. We'll go to video. I got 2 videos this time. I didn't want to do a lot of clipping. I could have, but I didn't want to bother. So let's go here. As you can see, I'm on the panel, but I'm not responding for over an hour. I was talking in the beginning part of it, and then I wasn't responding much after that because I was working. But let's see what's going on.
Yeah, paying attention. Yeah, but so I'm saying, like, before the Europeans got to Africa, there was already some type of slave trade going on. Africans, certain parts of Africa was known as slaves. The Arabs even called. You said when
they was in Seville, my bad. Not Seville, Spain, was where they had the area. Seville.
So you're saying when the Arabs came in, it had to be some type of system in place? Yeah, for them to be able to move that many that many people, right? There had to be some type of system in place. It couldn't have just been one side like that. Like I don't think we give Africans enough credit. Like we were just sitting down, letting people just. It was some Africans that had agency over their territory. I don't think the Arabs could just walk in. You dig what I'm saying? And just do what they wanted to do. Like that. That's just crazy. You know what I mean? For us to believe that Africans were just that fucking weak, yo. Like I don't believe it. I don't believe it.
So what can we prove?
I mean, what can you prove? They didn't say they went and fight. The Arabs didn't say they went and fighting and took all of them slaves. You feel me? So it had to be, you know, some type of trading going on. It had to be a market. Like that. That's basically what I'm saying. It had to be a market.
We would have to deal with it case by case, and not on a general basis, because it was different in different situations, different time periods, different kingdoms and empires. So we have to deal with it on a case by case basis and see where we can go from there.
Yeah, but like Sean was saying, like, you know, without the written record, like how far can we, you know what I mean?
Exactly.
But
it's a lot of speculation at the end of it.
Yeah, but then we also have Arab forces, right? So I mean, I know most of us wouldn't like Arab forces, but like if that's all exists because they was literate and they were the ones involved in the trade, then we gotta look at it at some point. The word that they used for black people became synonymous with slave. Like so, like it's damn near evident that, you know, it was an ongoing practice of enslaving black people. Like if they was known for that in the Arab world, like they was known for that.
It was that before. So what region at least are we talking about? East Africa, West Africa?
Yeah, it would have to be East Africa, the East African slave trade.
Okay. So
you know what I mean?
Yeah, they was already for. It was let me not even get into East Africa.
So I wanted to stop this real quick before I really interjected into this particular video to let you know. You've heard many different clips of this conversation now. This is the third video, by the way. And as you can see from this conversation, how the goalpost has moved. Now, it's not Chavis. He ain't on the panel. It's not Unc. He ain't on the panel. It ain't Kofi. He ain't on the panel. The only person that's on the panel that was involved in the other conversations was Sutek. And as you can see, Sutek ain't said nothing. He's asking questions for clarity. And he's going to tell you where he's confused at. So it couldn't have been any of the people that read books muddying the waters up. This was clearly the issue from the onset. So let's see what Sutek say right here.
More astute on that. I'm West Africa, so but by the time they got to West Africa, like you said, they already denoted black people as slaves.
Mm-hmm. And it would be crazy for us to believe that a land as big as Africa, especially even when you get in Central Africa going west, you know, they encountered well put together societies. They just weren't taking people from and then we know these well put together societies also were selling slaves and other goods into North Africa. Right? So we felt when we pick up on history, we find that it was slave markets in North Africa at the time. So somebody was getting these herbs and murders just wasn't you know what I mean, just going into, not saying that they didn't at some period stick off small tribes, right? But for the amount of people that they were moving, there had to be some type of African culpacy in that. You know what I mean? I mean, that's just common sense to me. You know what I mean?
All right, so you heard the first clip, 4 minutes and 53 seconds of him actually talking, and he talked about how the Arabs was up there in North Africa, and how the Arabs just didn't come into Africa and take over people, stuff like that. There's no way that the Africans would have let them do that. And he also tripled down on the fact that there was already a slave market and there was already slave trade in Africa. You heard him say it again. These are the things that he said. So when you say the Arab didn't come in there with force or anything like that, what happened in North Africa? You know, right after the Arabs had dominated, what them Hebrews always be claiming over there in Arabia, Samaria. After they done took over that part of the area, they came into Egypt. They came into Egypt with an army. See, before the prophet died, see, this is why I wrote the book, The Coming of Islam in the Land of the Blacks. The Coming of Islam in Balad al-Sudan, the Land of the Blacks. I wrote that book because many people act like Islam did not come into Africa with swords. They came with swords. They came to expand Islam, to convert as many people as possible. They felt it was only the right way to honor their fierce leader, the Prophet Muhammad. That was the only way that they, you know what I'm saying, that they looked at these things. So I'm going to go to West Africa, Islam, and the Arab World by Hunwick. And I'm going to get into North African links with Sub-Saharan Africa. And I'm just going to bullet point some things for you in this conversation that I feel like that you should know. Arab conquest, not Arab entry. Arab conquest of North Africa began in earnest with the founding of the garrison city of Kahrawan, which is modern-day Tanzania, in 670 AD. By the early years of the 8th century, a strip of territory 100 to 200 miles deep had been brought under Arab control all the way from the borders of Egypt to the Atlantic coast, with significant southerly extensions into the Fezzan and into the Sus region of southern Morocco. From both of these regions, probes were undertaken into lands to the south, but no conquest took place. Early trading contacts probably began in the later part of the 8th century following the arrival of the schismatic Kharijites of the Ibadi and the Sufi sects, who brought refuge in North Africa from determining attempts by the Abbasid caliphs from 750 AD to stamp them out in the central lands of Islam. At the earliest onset, it says Arab conquest, 8th century, Arab control, 100 to 200 miles deep, going all the way across North Africa down into the southern tips of Morocco. The principal trade routes of the early centuries of Islam appear to have been the following: a westerly route from Siljamasa down to Awagast, which would be South Mauritania, and from there to the Kingdom of Ancient Ghana, astride the region between Senegal and the Niger River, an easterly route from Jabal Nafusu through the Fezan and down through Kawa Oasis toward the Lake Chad region, where the Kingdom of Canaan emerged in the late 10th century, and a central route from Tahart or Wagala, where it was joined by the route from Tozir down to the Niger at Kaukau, in the land where Gayo sits. So, the next point. Far to the east, in Canaan, there was no gold to trade, and the chief commodity was most probably slaves. But let me rewind, because every time you bring Canaan Barnu up, which Sheffrin continues to do on the third day of Christmas, Canaan Barnu was under Islamic presence in 666 AD. We have the evidence for that. It's even written by them people themselves. 666 AD. Now, earlier, the Romans had obtained slaves and via intermarriages in Tibetsi Massif in the northern of Canaan, so a southerly extension of this trade should not surprise us. Black slaves appear in North African record as early as 826 as laborers engaged in a revolt in the Jared area, and later in that century of the Aghlabids of Afrique used some as soldiers. In fact, slaves became the second major item of commerce in trans-Saharan trade along all routes, right down to the early years of the 20th century. Prior to the 19th century, slaves were most often bartered for bark horses in ratios of up to 15 slaves for one horse, depending on the time and place and the age of the sex of the slave. Although horses were to be found in West Africa before Islamic era, they were small compared to the Barbary horse, which could carry a wider wearing chain of quilt mail, thus furnishing a war machine or a long distance raid. Have you heard this saying before? 2/3 of the slaves taken over the Sahara in the 19th century were females. You heard me mention Moulay Ismail, which had a vast slave army. In the absence of Arab Muslim conquest of West Africa, the way was open for political relations between the Sudanic and Mediterranean Africans based on mutual interests. But that was prior to 1492. There was already business there. So let me move the needle a little bit further. And talk about this so-called, I like the way he get off the Berbers real quick. It's almost as if you're an Islamic apologist. Until the Fatih period, Alexandria remained a town of secondary importance, which was kept under close supervision by provincial authority. So there was a risk of Byzantine landing in the port. I'm reading this for a reason. Okay, they're talking about the Navy in 645. So here we go. This is I'm reading UNESCO, General History of Africa, UNESCO, Volume 3, Chapter 7. The physical regime imposed on Egypt by Arabs at the time of the conquest. Remember that conquest I just mentioned? Well, this is that conquest, right? The conquest is right here. So I'm going to start all the way over and I'm going to rewind because you heard me make mention of this earlier. The Arabs had already conquered vast territories in Syria and Mesopotamia when they entered Egypt. Attracted as they were by the legendary opulence of countryside and its industrious population, through this territory, Islam, organized and triumphant, came into contact with Africa. right up to the present, Egypt has retained this vital role of mediator between the Arab East and Black Africa. Amir ibn al-As, one of the fleet of brilliant Arab generals of the early conquest into Egypt in December 639 AD, at the head of the modest army. After easily occupying El Arish and El Farama, he advanced to Bilbais and Heliopolis without meeting any serious opposition from the Byzantine army. The Byzantine entrenched themselves in the fortified town of Babylon, situated at the point of the Nile branches out into the delta. After some months of siege, Babylon fell in April 641. At the same time, the Arab troops carried out expeditions in Fayoum and into the delta, occupying the countryside. That's an army conquest coming to Africa. So I really don't have to read any more than that. I just wanted to bring it to the forefront that there was a conquest via East Africa. This is how they take over and have another conquest in North Africa. Going back to my red book, the African diaspora in the Mediterranean lands of Islam. Where do I want to start here? It may be seen superfluous to say that Islam did not invent slavery, but it is useful to bear in mind that the practice of slavery was a fundamental social assumption of Arab society at the rise of Islam and the various Mediterranean societies in which Islamic culture developed and assumed its overarching characteristics in the medieval period. Thus, until any attempts of abolition in the second half of the 19th century, largely under pressure of the Europe and Muslim societies of a greater Mediterranean basin, considered slavery as part of a natural order of things. They did. Indeed, part of the God-given order of things, and not as something to be interrogated or challenged. In pre-Islamic Arab society, slaves had in the main been captives of war, and under the Islamic disposition, war was in theory only to be fought against non-Muslims. A jihad, hence captives to be enslaved, would be by definition be unbelievers. This rapidly became an established rule of law, i.e., that it was legitimate to enslave only the unbelievers, and indeed it became common to justify enslavement of such persons as a punishment for their failure to accept the religion of Islam. This was not, in fact, the way in which slaves were generally acquired in practice, but on the basis of a don't ask, don't tell policy, slaves could be purchased from Muslims in the borderlands of Islam on the tacit assumptions that they were originally captives taken in jihad. Slavery thus became, in effect, a religious issue and was incorporated into religious discourse of Islam. In so doing, it also became a matter of law, since Islam's law as Sharia is an outgrowth of divine and word of the prophetic practice. This had both its positives and negative aspects. On the positive side, the law recognized the slave as something more than a mere chattel. Indeed, insomuch as a law in many cases allotted this to slave only half the punishment of a free person and provide for only half the privileges, i.e., for a male to be married concurrently to a maximum of 2 women rather than 4 allowable free males. It could be argued that a slave was granted partial humanity or was even half free. The law also provided the numerous avenues through which a slave could gain his or her freedom. On the negative side, since slavery was written into the Sharia, it was considered a divinely sanctioned practice that mere human beings could not abrogate or interfere with. In fact, abolishing slavery effectively took away from the believers certain paths for redemption. Freeing a slave could constitute atonement for the commission of certain forbidden acts, and when manumission was carried out as an act of pity, It was a path to paradise. So you gotta go when you're dealing with this stuff, you gotta deal with the historical context, but you also have to deal with the mindset. What up, Kwame? I see you finally caught us, bro. You're welcome. Peace. But you gotta deal with the historical context. Then I can go and pull up Timothy Insal's work. Why would I pull up Timothy Insal's work? Because Timothy Insal's work is extensively on the rise of Islam in Africa. The name of the book itself speaks the archaeology of Islam in sub-Saharan Africa. So it deals with things that would indicate that certain type of things occurred based on the archaeology, right? So what happened in the Zanj revolt? Anyone familiar with the Zanj revolt, when it occurred, what took place, what transpired? What was that about? Anyone know? What about the Red Sea stuff? Anyone know? Anyone? You don't? Okay. So you don't know? That's all right. So hold on just a second for me. I don't want to elaborate on that or bring anything to the forefront. I just want to kind of let people know which direction we can go. We can go to East Africa and we can deal with Islam in the area and slaves being present. That was 4 quick sources real quick. So I want to go to video number 2 real quick. Go to video number 2. I'm going to play this. And you know, I just want people to see how muddy the water is. I got to play this, and then we're going to get right into part 6 of Nzinga. So I appreciate everybody tuning in. Like the show, share the show, tell a friend, tell a friend. Let's get it cracking. This is 4 minutes and 58 seconds. Let's go.
Like I said, I mentioned the kingdom of Kingdom, right? And
It ain't East Africa.
Yeah, but it's central. Their kingdom was central. It went up into southeastern Libya. Right. So, you know, I'm saying, like, it was central, and they traded in a lot of their goods, and the people that they were selling made it into North African market. So these people wasn't sitting on their hands. They wasn't sitting on their hands waiting for Arabs to come pick them up. They were selling slaves and shit to, you know what I mean, to those Arabs. So
we ain't saying the source for none of the stuff that he was saying. He's insinuating things without evidence, because he didn't even know that the Arabs was in Canaan Barnu in 666 until I showed them in that video that we did on the Matsu Warrior clan. He didn't know that. So all of that would make any point that he made, that he continues to try to make moving forward off that, it would make it wrong. So I still hadn't done the video, right? I hadn't done the video yet. This is the 3rd video of Sheffrin. I hadn't done the video taking away Canaan Barnu yet. He is still under the impression that Canaan Barnu was not under Islamic influence. It was not an Islamic state, but it was under Islamic influence because they were there. They had a presence, and there was trade routes that linked them directly to North Africa, where business could be conducted. In part, the trans-Saharan slave trade. And we still don't find a slave market.
So what is the conversation? Is it slave markets or slave economies or just slavery or what?
It goes back and forth. You know what I mean?
That's why I'm confused.
It goes back and forth, but we know that a lot of their economy was built off of slavery. Like when we pick up on these, No, if we pick up when we pick up on these people, when Europeans start writing about Canaan, they're talking about them as slavers.
Yeah, that's European though. They don't get to Africa to 16th century or 15th century.
Yeah, but they wasn't talking about them as being slavers with them. They were saying that the Arabs and the North Africans was using them as slaves. You see what I'm saying? So
where is the source for that? Where's the source for that? I gotta hear that again. Hold up.
The Arabs and the North Africans was using them as slaves. You see what I'm saying? So it existed before the Europeans, right?
So slave trade existed before the European because there was Arabs there. You said that, but then you said it was before Arabs. But then you just turned around and then you said that the North Africans and the Arabs was using they was using middlemen. I'm confused. You see what I'm saying? He was all over the place. See, y'all think that I just be an asshole for no reason. No, I'm not trying to be. The thing is when you're having a conversation and you don't impose context and you don't deal with methodology and historical, first of all, when you're dealing with history, there's a historical method that is required for you to do what you need to do in order to come to an honest conclusion about the things that you've gathered your information on and you did and you've got to your end game, your conclusion. There's a method for everything, and there was no method used right here. Now, when he says this, it makes me look over to my books again because I'm looking for a book that would even attempt to try to support him, and there's not a book over there that would attempt to try to support him. These middlemen don't become prevalent until Arab influence, and these middlemen become prevalent when they convert. So let me keep it a buck. Let me keep it a buck for people who are unaware of how this whole slave trade thing went down. All right. So when we're talking about the slave trade, people tend to look toward Ghana. Among the Akan, they look at the Razes. Now, the Razes was similar to a lot of Berbers, right? And the Amazigh. And let me be more specific. Now I'm gonna leave it at Berbers. I'm gonna go with the blue people. Y'all know who the blue people is? The Tuareg. I'm gonna deal with that. Anybody seen a poster ever put up that has anything to do with the Tuareg cross? The cross wasn't a religious cross. The cross was a directional because the Tuareg moved in directions. They knew what they was doing. They were nomads. They lived among the desert. They did everything that they needed to do to handle their business the way that they handled their business. However, there was something unique about the Tuareg. When it come to trade, the Tuareg would join any religious set that they needed to in order to do business with the people in the area. The Tuareg were in North Africa. I ain't talking about the West African Tuareg because they come later, but the Tuareg was in North Africa and they flipped around. Well, what does that have to do with the Razes? The Akan, the Ashanti tribe. The Razes did the same thing. They would convert to Islam in order to do business with the Arabs and cater to them so that they can deal with slaves and all of that. They were raiders. But the Razes come later. So when he says that there was middlemen, he's not giving you historical context and telling you time periods. because you don't get middlemen until you get people. You don't get middlemen until you got buyers. You got people that you can do business with that would entrust in you to be able to get these bodies or get whatever they needed. So historically, it's kind of all over the place to say certain things and never give it any context, because these middlemen that you're portraying people out to be and things like that, they don't really exist at this time, at this point, like that. Because who they middlemaning for? They ain't got no business part. They wouldn't be middlemen. They would be running their own business. So when Sutek says what he says about there ain't no slave economy, who's benefiting from it, you don't have evidence of that.
And then when you look at the herb sources, and I got a couple books on it. When you look at the herb sources, when they first mentioned,
you got a couple books on it. What are books at? What books? What Arab sources? Point me to the Arab sources so I can pull them up right now and read them. Give me the page number. All you got to do is just give me the page number. Give me the book, the name of the book, and the page number. I pull up the Arab sources and I read them, and we'll see. Because as soon as you say I got a couple of Arab sources, okay, so now you have Islam in the area. You didn't know that, did you? No. What are Arab sources? We ain't even got a source from slave markets or a slave trade before an Arab, before a European, 3 days in. So where are the sources? We've just demonstrated that the conversation has changed 5 times in 3 videos.
those people, they had mentioned the slavery aspect. And this was before they converted to Islam. So, go back to my point. Yet last night when y'all was saying that, that only the Muslims was doing it. Well, Canaan Banu was dealing in slavery before they converted to Islam.
You see how many times he keep running to Canaan Barno? Because he's still under the impression that Canaan Barno wasn't an Islamic state. He's still under the impression that Islam was not in the area until they became an Islamic state. He is under the impression that Canaan Barno was trading people without any presence of Islam, not knowing that they were there in 666 AD. If you got Arab sources, your Arab sources would tell you about the Safawa people in Canaan Barno, and they will put them in there and say your earliest Arab source would indicate that. And then if you go look at the internal sources, which you don't have, it would have told you that the internal people never heard of the Safawi people, that they were foreign people. So this whole thing about Canaan Barno is uprising in this so-called oral tradition would say that the people from the east came in and created their kingdom would be some Islamic horse crap. We don't care what you say tomorrow, bro. You've been talking for months. You did a whole month of talking. You got 10 videos, but you already won. Remember, you titled a video, you already won. You ain't even talking about African involvement. You ain't even talking about in the slave trade, because that would put you in the era or the minds of the Portuguese. Your whole conversation from the gate was that there was a slave market and there was a slave trade before the Europeans. And Nzinga gets dragged into this because of your ignorance. And you couldn't define what slavery was to Africans and their worldview. You kept saying it was, well, Sosa kept saying it was humanistic. Which would be, if it was humanistic, then that means everybody saw everything the same way. So how could you distinguish differences among people if everybody saw everything the same way? No, worldview and culture has everything to do with reshaping the mind of how people saw things. So the way that they conducted in Africa was not like they did in Europe, was not like they did in Arabia, was not like they did in East Asia. It was all different. So to impose that everybody had one central idea about what the hell slavery meant to them culturally was disingenuous and ignorant. Say what you want. We hear what you're saying right now. And we only on the third video.
Right? Because in the 8th century,
our conversation though was slave economies though. Was it an economy based on slavery?
yeah, by the time Europeans got there, it was well popping.
But
By the time the Europeans got there, it was already on and popping.
they show that it was that their economy was based on slavery.
No, by the time but by the 16th century, it was. That's what I'm saying. By the 16th century, they was. The main thing that they was exploiting was human bodies.
So here we have it. By the 16th century, the main thing that they was trading was human bodies. So that would only mean that the economy has shifted, because prior to the 16th century, what the hell were they trading? What was they trading? Don't make me pull my books back out. They were trading all kind of natural resources. There was no bodies involved. Not on the Portuguese side. The Portuguese was in Africa in 1440s. The Arabs was in Africa in the early 600s, the early 600s. They was in Central West Africa in 660s. Canaan Barnu, who you keep running to, 666. They saying even they had a presence in Ghana in that same time frame. See, you didn't listen to the video that I put out that day that I responded about the Canaan Barnu thing. You just said, oh, you just gave what I said clarity. Let me focus. My bad, y'all. I'm sorry. I apologize.
So what do you call that? What, they was doing it for fun? They had to be making money.
Of course, they was doing it for economic reasons.
Right.
But that's not saying that their economy was based on that. See what I'm saying?
Right. We had to see what else were they doing to you know what I mean, to boost their national income, other than, you know what I mean, the slaves. That's how they was getting guns, especially Canaan Bunner. The guns and the horses. They were selling slaves, raising and selling slaves for horses and guns. Like that was the main thing.
Why they need horses and guns?
Because they was a war people.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? They was a war people. They could take over more territory, right? They had an empire. An empire got to expand. You know what I mean? They got to take over more territory. They was in direct conflict with Songhai, I think, for a period of time.
Now he brings in the Songhai Empire, which ain't nowhere around this whole time period that you was just arguing a little bit ago. You see how you taking us all over the place? Your chronology is effed up. Your chronology is effed up. So here we have it. The man in the chat. Queen Nzinga's a bitch. Queen Nzinga's a hoe. We challenge her masculinity. She was a woman trying to act like a man. She was this, she was that. All the slanderous attempts on Queen Nzinga's legacy started because you couldn't even define what slavery was from an African perspective. You're so caught up in wanting to be a Berber that you don't know. This is what I call it barbershop talk. The psychology of a barbershop. You cutting hair. You're doing an edge up right now. I mean, you're getting the ball fade right now. And you're trying to have a historical conversation, which I don't know why, but you're trying to have a conversation about history with someone, and you saying all these things while you're trying to do a fade. You probably cut a plug in the brother head and had to trim his hair down a little bit more.
So they needed guns and horses. They even compete, right? Because they were vying for a lot of the same territory. So, you know, I mean, you need guns and horses to protect yourself, especially at that time. You know what I mean? So I don't know. I don't know.
Exactly. We need to get more.
I don't know. Y'all heard it out of his mouth. He said all of that. And then toward the end, listen to what he said at the end.
Exactly. We need to get more into.
You know what I mean? So I don't know. I don't know.
Exactly.
Which one is it? You know or you don't know?
Exactly. We need to get more.
You know or you don't know?
I don't know. You need guns and horses to protect yourself, especially at that time. You know what I mean? So I don't know. I don't know.
Sheffrin, do you know anything about history?
You know what I mean? So I don't know.
Sheffrin, do you know anything about historical context?
I don't know.
Sheffrin, do you think whatever you say tomorrow means anything to me? I won't be watching it.
You know what I mean? So I don't know.
So until you get some type of research methodology and understand that you got to read a whole book, not a 3-minute read article, then it's a wrap. Sheffrin, do you know anything about anything?
I don't know.
Sheffrin, do you seriously think that you got something that I ain't got?
You know what I mean? So I don't know.
So why you keep speaking on a subject matter you don't know nothing about?
I don't know.
And there you have it. Because he don't know. Although the Portuguese had routed Nzinga from her war camp in the remote Ngangala region in 1629 and captured her sisters, they had not heard the last of her by any means. Within a few months after her daring escape, Nzinga inserted herself back into the political life of Ndongo by returning from Kindongo Islands and sending ambassadors to the new Portuguese governor in Luanda, Manuel Coutinho, who had taken over the Sousa in 1630. Now, for the next 2 decades, not a year passed without Nzinga leading her troops in a battle against the Portuguese and their African allies. She also used her formidable diplomatic skills to forge an allegiance with the Dutch. Ladies and gentlemen, now here comes the Dutch, who conquered and ruled part of Angola from 1641 to 1648, and to build up a pan-Central African alliance against the Portuguese that included the Congo Kingdom and several other nominally independent states. What contributed most to her renown, however, was Nzinga's decision to adopt rituals from the Mbangala bands and combine them in Mbandu traditions. Remember, This dude named Concrete Core said that she didn't deal with African spirituality. She was a Christian. He tried to demonize it and say, she ain't even, so I don't want to hear nothing about no African spirituality. She ain't deal with none of that. But again, right when you made that claim, the night before that, when you hopped in the chat and hopped out, I had cleared that up for you, Corey. All you had to do was listen, but you didn't want to listen. So let me continue. So she combined the Mbandu and the Mbangala traditions, creating a new ideology that relied on the inversion of gender categories and new religious and circular rites. These bold actions so set Nzinga apart that she became the stuff of legend among both Africans and Europeans, not only after her death, but in life as well. Nzinga's appearance in Ndongo politics in 1630 had many repercussions for Portuguese policies. The most immediate impact was the blocking of the slave routes, which meant that the Pumberos, Africans trading on behalf of the Portuguese owners, were unable to travel freely to the markets beyond Ndongo to purchase slaves. I'm going to say that again for the boy in the back cutting hair. Don't mess his lineup up. She was blocking in 1630. She was blocking slave routes. She wasn't trading slaves right now. Or we don't know if she was yet. We ain't got there. But according to the historical record, as long as she existed and imposed her will, she continued to mount a blockage of slave routes. So the traders who mediated between the Portuguese could not do business. They couldn't purchase. They couldn't travel. There was no export going on along those routes because of Nzinga. As a result, merchants in Luanda had no slaves to export. As a result, merchants in Luanda had no slaves to export, and officials of the Camara, which is the governing body, warned Katanho that in the light of the sorry state of the economy, he could not ignore Nzinga. They suggested that he set her up with one of her sisters as a queen of Ndongo in place of Angola Hari. Nzinga must have been apprised of the discussion taking place in Luanda, for she did not give her ambassador slaves as ransoms for her sisters. There was no slaves given on behalf of her sisters, as was the custom. Instead, the ambassador informed Katanhu that Nzinga wished to return to Ndongo as queen, and that if she would not consent to his plan, then one of her sisters, preferably Kambu, should rule. She also promised to send the 100 slaves annually that Hari had been paying in tribute. With this message, Nzinga made it clear to the new governor and other decision makers in Luanda and Lisbon that they would have to deal with her if they wanted to restore a flourishing slave trade. So Nzinga made her point clear. If you, the Portuguese, you want to continue your business here, Sheffrin, you listening? Don't run off, Sheffrin. Don't go nowhere. Don't go nowhere, Chef. You still here? Put a 1 in the chat, you still here. Breathe in the mic. If the Portuguese was to do business, they got to deal with Nzinga. Because she, as long as she had a presence there, she was controlling the routes. And nobody can do business if Nzinga say you can't do business. That's a boss. You can't cut hair in this barbershop unless I tell you you can cut hair in this barbershop, boy. Coutinho, who was preoccupied with subordinated Sobers in the Dembos area who were threatening the Portuguese farms, did not respond to Nzinga's overtures right away. Instead, he called on De Souza, who was still in Luanda, where he would remain until the end of January 1631 to study the situation and advise him. De Souza was intent on resolving the situation in Ndongo. To continue with crisis was jeopardizing the peace and prosperity that he had hoped for after the wars against Nzinga. and he wanted to protect his own legacy. Immediately began to gather additional materials with the aim of presenting Catanhu and the King of Portugal with a comprehensive plan for resolving the crisis in Ndango. He realized that most of the Sobas in Ndango continued to question Hari's legitimacy to rule. Moreover, the Portuguese were on edge as a result of rumors about Nzinga's association with the Mbangala leader Kasanji, the status of her two sisters, and the possibility of her attempting to rescue them. De Sousa's long letter to the King of Portugal, summing up the situation, provided the only account we have of these concerns, negotiations involving Nzinga and her sister. Don't go nowhere, Chef. It's getting good. Here come the good part. De Sousa was right to worry that Nzinga's appearance in the region would allow her to be in contact with her sisters and would stir up more anti-Hari in Portuguese sentiment. The information he had gathered concerning the opinion of the Sobas and the Makatos, the leading heads, confirmed his suspicions. He realized that retaining Hari as a king and representing many of the risks of Portuguese plans. As the situation stood, even after 4 years on the throne, Hari had not been able to impose his authority over the Sobas. They had not yet sent tribute to him. Remember, as he was to be the sitting king, the Sobas, the leading heads, were to pay him in slaves or pay tribute to him in slaves. And then in return, he would have to pay De Sousa 100 slaves per tribute. And he never had the control of the people to get the slaves sent to him. Therefore, he could never send them to De Sousa. But De Sousa was adamant because he was trying to reject Nzinga all the way around. So if you missed part 5, I'm just trying to bring you up real slightly, not all the way, but just slightly to where we are when we're talking about this stuff. See, the people in the chat that have been riding with me through 1 through 5, they already know where we are. So when I'm saying certain things, it could jog their memory about the previous show. But see, De Sousa also knew that one of the major obstacles to smoother operation in the system and widespread lack of respect for Hari in Ndongo, respect was accorded to a man who possessed a great number of slaves, musicians, and attendants. Mbandu Sobas had been young men during their last years of Ndongo kingdom, when the king had authority over hundreds of thousands of peasants and serfs and commanded massive armies. Compared with the former kings, Hari lived in a destitute life. In August of 1633, a missionary wrote that he was distressed to find Hari so poor in people as to appear like an ordinary Soba of Ilamba. Indeed, hardly anything had to change in Ndongo since De Sousa had first nominated Hari to the throne in 1626. At the time, he threatened him with the removal if he sought alliances outside the kingdom of Ndongo or to disrupt the peace. Because De Sousa prohibited him from undertaking any new wars and he did not give him the military assistance he needed, Hari was unable to carry out successful campaigns. Instead, De Sousa assigned him to the role of chief collector. Where my boy at, man? He ran away. He ran away when that history came, didn't he? But it was simply Hari's overall inadequacy that alienated the people. Local leaders and ordinary Mbandus alike rejected Hari because they adhered to an ideology of kinship that regarded the king not as an ordinary person, but as a divinity with the ability to provide for the well-being of his people. Leadership was determined by kinship, and the legitimate ruler was the closest biological descent of the former ruler. Although Cardoza had forced the Sobas and Makatos, the leading heads, to elect Hari as king, they still regarded him as illegitimate. They dismissed him because his mother was a slave, and him himself had been a slave in Fanji's household. More important, this lack of property ancestry meant that the lack of spiritual power was essential to validate him as their king. Nzinga and her sisters, as the closest living kin of the former ruler of Mbandi, possessed the aurora of divinity that legitimized their right to lead the kingdom. Indeed, this thinking was reinforced by the people's reaction to the utter devastation that resulted from the campaigns against Nzinga from smallpox during the smallpox epidemic. De Sousa knew his deep-seated attachment to the sisters had to be taken seriously. He discussed with the new governor, with religious and other authorities in Luanda, and with the king of Portugal the possibility of removing Hari as king and returning him to his former position as lord of Pungangu and Dango. They were divided on whether to put Kambi or Fanji in his place. However, particularly since they knew that Nzinga had returned to the area with a part of her army she had put together. On one side was Bishop Luwandi, who argued that the returning of a kingdom to these women would be the right thing. There was no reason to deprive them of it. He said, since Nzinga had already promised to give up her right to the throne if the Portuguese nominated one of her sisters as queen. He pointed out that she had also promised to pay the Portuguese a tribute, 100 slaves, that Hari had not paid. On the other side were the Jesuit fathers who were serving as Hari's advisors. They were not surprisingly dead set against returning the kingdom to Nzinga's sisters. They knew better than anyone that Hari had failed to deliver the population for conversion he had promised. Christian missions work in Dango is almost a standstill, as most of the population tolerated only a form of popular Christianity that was heavily influenced by Mbandu ritual practices. No matter, they argued that Hari should, on principle, retain the crown of Ndango because he fully intended to pay 100 slaves that he owed as tribute. It was during the decade of 1630 that Nzinga undertook transformation that would lead her to become known as one of the major female figures in the early modern world. This transformation built on her early exploits, which influenced Portuguese notions of colonial rule and even modern Angolan politics, beginning in her extraordinary diplomatic co-op in Luanda in 1622. Excuse me. At that time, she adroitly adopted Mbandu notions of leadership while shaping an economic, diplomatic, and cultural collaboration with the Portuguese that allowed her to maintain Mbandu autonomy. Her innovative political leadership further developed when she inherited the throne of Ndango from Mbandi in 1624, her brother. She governed with a style that was attentive to traditional Mbandu political and cultural notions of leadership. She clearly demonstrated this in 1626, when she invoked her brother's spirit for guidance with the sacrifice of 14 virgins before fleeing from the island of Danji. But what really propelled Nzinga's image as a leader beyond the confines of Central Africa was her adaptation to implementation of other Central African leadership styles into those of Mbandu people. The new ideas came from Ferd Mbangalas, whose martial traditions and rituals she first witnessed during her brother's and possibly her father's reign in 1625. When she married the Mbangala Kasa, she came to know the ceremonies firsthand, and she had participated in some of the kavazis described as barbaric sacrifices and obscene dances. She became more familiar with the intricate beliefs and rituals surrounding her leadership during the initiation ceremony she underwent to become a warrior in Kasanji's camp in Ngangala between 1629 and 1631. It was then that Nzinga participated in the Kuri, the blood oath ceremony that required the oath taker to drink human blood to affirm friendship and alliance. Nzinga became an expert of Mbangala rituals, making a life-changing transformation from exile Mbandu queen to Mbangala captain in her own right. Adopting Mbangala ideas about leadership might have been easier for her than becoming a Christian. The Mbandu and Mbangala notions of leadership that emerged during the 16th century were in respect similar, although they differed in some fundamental ways as well. In Mbandu tradition, human and other sacrifices to recently deceased ancestors were practiced among the elite, but were not everyday occurrences. See, the early Mbangala founders had developed quite different notions about leadership from those that were found among the Mbandus. As we have seen, the Mbandu people had established a state system governed by rules of inheritance based on designated lineages. And according to this system, a group of electors validated the candidate's right to the throne by certifying his or her eligibility, the most crucial aspect of which was descent from the past kings. The descent ensured that the candidate possessed the spiritual grace that elevated him or her essentially to the rank of deity. According to the traditions, some of the Ijali had already been established when Danji, one of the original Mbangala leaders, led his band sometime in the late 16th century to the region of Ngangala, then the province of Mataba. Many of the Ijala focused on the role of women. There were laws that required women to kill their children at birth, prevented women from giving birth when Colombo placed restrictions on sexual relationships, and allowed women to be sacrificed at the funerals of their deceased male concubines. Other laws ordered that women should not under normal circumstances be killed or eaten, and required elaborate festivals for girls at Menarche, the first menstrual cycle. Most of the other Njala dealt with the ritual performed at funeral, promotions, or changes in status and mechanisms for inducting young children into the Colombo. That's among the Mbangala. That's why they say they eat humans and all of that. See, if Danji had already set up a system where cannibalism, rape, violence, and forcible initiation of captive children into Mbangala lifestyle were a commonplace, his concubine Musasa, who took over the Colombo after his death, was reputed to have exceeded him in cruelty trained in Timbo and in Dambu. Her daughter by Danji to perfect the system she had inherited Timbo and Ndamdu was credited with regularizing the Njali, was reported to have performed a ritual that degendered her, transforming her psychologically into a man, soldier, and warrior, after which she became the legislator of Mbangala and revised of Njali. It is believed that the Timbo of Ndumbu initiated another ritual designed to either side or transform her gender, taking up a special military drum she made and pounded charcoal, mixed it with Maji a Samba, and added various herbs to produce a red and white colors. She covered herself with a mixture while staring at the great bonfire she had made. This is a ritual dance she's performing right now. Then she danced and drummed to an induced and altered state of consciousness. You see this in Africa a lot. A practice that was a major part of Mbangala rituals. Drawn to her by ritualistic drumming, her followers followed her in a possessed state, and she announced to them that she would no longer be known as a woman, but as a warrior. She took a bow and arrow and spear and danced the war dance, usually performed by male warriors. Her stated intentions was to go from place to place conquering people, and she insisted she would no longer be considered a lady and captain of a squadron, but an entire battalion. She said she's going to be the whole brigade. She demanded her followers fidelity by requiring each of them to undergo similar rituals using the same ritual paraphernalia she had used. And of course, they would do so. It gets thick right here. Now, during Nzinga's time, several Mbangala leaders roamed through Central Africa, invading the kingdoms of Mataba, Congo, and Ndongo, Portuguese, Angola, and neighboring regions. Leaders such as Kasa and Kasanji assiduously imposed their 14 Njalas and their customs on their followers, many of them captured as children from the regions they invaded. These Mbangala leaders did not establish states. Rather, they were nomadic and moved on with their Colombos after destroying everything in their path. They are heated, and this is all orchestrated by the pushback and the resentment and all the ignorance of the Portuguese. They were coming for the Portuguese. It was because of this reputation that various Portuguese governors used them as allies in many successful campaigns. Remember, the Mbangala they were lethal, but with Nzinga around, they were deadly, even more deadly. See, Nzinga was looking for a model for her future political life, and she chose neither the Portuguese governors on whom she planned to wreak vengeance, nor the Congo kings who had only a precarious hold over their people, nor her brother Mbandi, whose weaknesses she scorned. Instead, she chose for her model Timbo and Dambu, and feared Mbangalas, whose reputation for carnage, cruelty, and cannibalism made enemies and allies alike quake with terror. So in deciding to adopt the traditions, rituals, and lifestyles of the Mbangalas, Nzinga was rejecting the status of an exile that the Portuguese has imposed on her. Although she was familiar with the reputation of the Mbangala and must have used some of their techniques when she fought alongside them during her brother's reign, it was only after she had become the Kasa's wife that she studied these techniques in depth and chose to take part in them as her own leadership style. She would transform herself into an Mbangala leader by performing ceremonies and rituals modeling the ones of the Timbo and Ndambu, had instituted recruiting Mbangala priests to train her in the proper ways of performing the rituals and dances. The first requirement to attain the status of Mbangala leader was to kill one's own offspring. Of course, what happened to her brother is what her brother did to her. She can't have no children. She was infertile. You remember what her brother did to her and her sisters? So there was no offspring. She took an infant from another female's concubine, crushed him in a mortar, made oil of the tissue, and pasted it on her body. She did that. That was part of the Mbangala rituals. It had to be done. See, this is the part, right? Sheffrin, you here? I was wrong yesterday, and I'm going to be more wrong tomorrow. So get ready. We don't care. We don't even know why you still here. Outside the fact that you should be taking note. You should do less typing and more listening. Less typing and more listening. In 1622, she relished the title Nzinga Mbandi Gombole that had been bestowed upon her by Mbandi and identified her as the official envoy, literally a referee to the Portuguese. The same year, she received Christian name of Anna. It's going backwards in 1622. And they baptized her under Luanda and used it in her official correspondence with Portuguese. Her use of both Mbandu and Christian names indicated her desire to intertwine the two cultures. After she took over the leadership in Ndongo following her brother's death, she was adamant that both her people and the Portuguese address her as Angola Kalanji, Queen of Angola, instead of continuing to use the honorific title Lady of Angola. Now, with her adoption of the name Angola Nzinga, Ngombe Nji, she was signaling that she had come to yet another turning point in her life. Although her Mbangala induction ceremony represented a fundamental break with much of her past, Nzinga retained some of the symbols and rituals that were distinctively Mbandu, just as she had done following her conversion to Christianity. She did not discard Mbandu tradition. She merely added Mbangala ideas into her belief system. She held on to Mbandu title and incorporated Angola Mbandi. And as of one of the Mbangala ancestors, she also continued to use the Christian icons that she had received over the years. So no matter what she did, she adapted, she adjusted, and she incorporated. She infused different cultural nuances and norms to assimilate herself among the people in which she was to protect. That's me, my total emphasis. Now don't listen. Go get a pencil and a pad and take notes. Cause you ain't say none of this when you slandered her. Although the time is not preciously known, Nzinga must have conducted the ceremony that made her Mbangala leader sometime in the spring of 1631. Shortly before, after she returned to the island of Danji and sent ambassador to Luanda, then she began to put together an army. Many of those who joined her and underwent the Mbangala initiation was disaffected, and Bandus who had refused to accept Angola Hari as their king. Now, when the Portuguese authorities in Luanda learned of Nzinga's new identity as an Mbangala leader, they were gravely concerned. She had now struck more fear in these people than one could ever understand. Let's see why. In 1631, a Jesuit missionary working in the Congo provided one of the first contemporary accounts of Nzinga as an Mbangala leader. Although Nzinga had been reared in Luanda and cleansed by baptism, his report noted with disdain she lived an unmarried life, just like the queen of the Amazons, and she governed the army like a warrior female. Furthermore, she was fearlessly going before her own people, increasing the spirits of all the people. He noted that she was becoming the best leader and that she offered asylum to their slaves fleeing to her with the great financial loss of the Portuguese who had deprived her of the kingdom. Her personal conversor, Cavazi, they gave Cavazi's writings in Portugal. Sheffrin, you should plan a vacation to go to Portugal and see if you can access Cavazi's writings, which will smack you in your face and tell you that when you called her a bitch, you disrespected her. When you called her a hoe, you disrespected her. When you called her a Nazi, you disrespected her. Because you didn't know nothing about her, but you disrespected her. That's questionable. Now, Cavazi relied on a conversation he had with Nzinga followers when he lived in the court between 1657 and 1663, referred to in Bengalas as malefactors and thieves who were careless both on their lives and those of others. By rejecting political subordination by the Portuguese and making use of Mbandu and other Central African ideas of leadership, Nzinga was able to reestablish herself as a major power in the region. Nzinga soon modeled her army into a fighting machine and gained a reputation as a formidable Mbangala leader. Although no direct eyewitness accounts of Nzinga's military exploits during the 1630s are extant based on the conversations that Cavazi had with Nzinga and officials in her court at Mataba a few decades later, it is possible to reconstruct her movement during the period, realizing by the end of 1631 that Governor Kotaho was not responding to her diplomatic overtures. She brought with her forces into Ndongo and set them loose to ravage the territory and block the trade routes. She has again, Sheffrin, she has again stopped the slave trade. She stopped the slave trade. Slow down and listen. She blocked the slave trade. You not gonna sell no slaves in here. Go cut hair and listen. Nzinga branded the defeat queen like a common slave, but did not kill and eat her as required by Mbangala laws, apparently to avoid an uprising by our own Mbandu troops who were still unaccustomed to Mbangala ways of dealing with their enemies. Even Nzinga herself may not have fully come to terms with the expectation placed on her as Mbangala leader. She banished Queen Mwango from the capital, permitting her to rule in another part of the kingdom. But the queen died soon after, and Nzinga had the queen buried in a tomb with her former Mataba rulers and made sure the traditional rituals were followed during the funeral. And Nzinga also spared the life of the queen's daughter and also Mwanga and reared her in the Colombo. In the time she gave Mwango her own contingent of slaves, over whom she had total control, this daughter remained in Nzinga's side for the rest of her life. Nzinga's conquest of Mataba gave her the political base she had lacked up until then. She became the first Mbangala leader to rule over a state and still adhere to Mbangala lifestyle. Mataba was crucial to Nzinga's plans for reconquering Ndongo. Its location on the border of the kingdom meant that she could continue to harass Hari and pressure Kataho to release her sisters, and who was still in captivity in Luanda. Nzinga, ever one to capitalize on the traditions, also appears to have promoted the idea that she was a deity because of her status as a descendant of Ndongo kings. Let me pause real quick. Did you know that this lady is in her 50s doing this? She's 50, she's like 50 something. We're in a period of her life where she has did all of this work and she ain't participated in no slave trade yet. And here we are, she's in her 50s and she's coming into her own, regaining her strength, getting enough power to endure and wreak havoc on the Portuguese. So between 1631 and 41, this aura of invincibility followed Nzinga as she led her forces from one victorious campaign to another, eventually conquering lands of Portuguese had formerly claimed. During this period, Nzinga had also adopted other aspects of Mbangala lifestyle that allowed her to become a dominant Mbangala leader in the region. As major transition in her evolution came when she decided that her inner circle and followers should regard her as a man, not a woman. See, that's where you get that from. She began her transition, oddly enough, by marrying a man. Wow. So y'all talked about her sexuality. Y'all called her a man, and then she turned around and she marries a man. Wow. She also required the males to sleep in the same room as the female bodyguards, but demanded that they remain chaste. If one of the male concubines and the female bodyguards touched someone else, even accidentally in their sleep, they would be killed or rendered impotent or infertile. That's that in Bengala. Now, by the time Nzinga began negotiations with Cotton Hoe concerning her sisters and the situation in Ndongo, she had become the most powerful African leader in the region. Her transformation into an Mbangala leader was largely responsible for this. She knew that she would attract large numbers of Mbandus and other peoples who for some time had been leaderless. See, by joining the Mbangala and still having a presence among her own Mbandu people, she could now merge two different tribes, the Mbandu and the Mbangala. With her rule, she had the power that she needed. She had the military forces she needed. She was ready for the Portuguese now. It took 20-some years, but here we are. Her conquest at Mataba gave her the base she needed to launch attacks against Ndongo and surround the areas controlled by the Portuguese. Throughout 1632 and 1633, the constant incursions of her Mbangala armies into Ndongo, she terrified the Sobas and villagers who had put themselves under Hari's authority after Nzinga's 1629 flight from Ngangala, that many simply joined her on or attached themselves to one of the many other Mbangala bands. Others fled to the bush. Nzinga's activities had that disruptive effect she desired. Thus, the Pomberos and Portuguese who ventured into the slave markets beyond Mbaka risked being killed or imprisoned by Nzinga soldiers. Go in that slave market if you want to, Sheffrin. She was killing you. Remember, she's supposed to be selling 13,000 slaves a year. I mean, however you want to put it. Remember, you asked that question earlier, but here we are. She's controlling the routes. She has cut off trade. They can't move no bodies. She messed up the economy of the Portuguese, bruh. But you didn't say that. You never once said that this lady disrupted the Portuguese endeavors in the slave trade. You never did. Not one time. You black-eyed her with your bullshit. An official report that the Camara in Luanda sent to the King of Portugal in July 1633 noted that the country doesn't produce much since markets that were open with lots of slaves are now closed. I'm gonna run that back. An official report that the Camara in Luanda sent to the King of Portugal in July 1633 noted that the country does not produce much since markets that were open with lots of slaves are now closed because of the armies that Nzinga, who wants the kingdom of Ndongo, brings into the interior, and the ones that the Jagas, the Mbangalas, bring, with tribute in slaves and in kind having almost disappeared, and slave exports having declined from nearly 13,000 slaves exported in 1630 and 1631 to almost none in 1633. You asked this question earlier, and I didn't answer you. So I'm going to run it back and I'm going to say it slowly so that everybody can catch this. An official report that the Camara in Luanda sent to the King of Portugal in July in 1633 noted that the country does not produce much since markets that were open with lots of slaves are now closed. Because of the armies that Nzinga, who wants the kingdom of Ndongo, brings into the interior, and the ones that Jagas and Bangalas bring, with tribute and slaves and in kind having almost disappeared, and slave exports having declined from nearly 13,000 slaves exported in 1630 to 31 to almost none in 1633. Contatho could not afford to make war against Nzinga. Nigga, you said so much you don't even know what you said. The Portuguese also faced another threat from Dutch forces. After the Dutch made inroads into Luanda region, Conho devoted most of his attention to fortifying areas around Luanda, and Ndongo Hari had no choice but to face Nzinga's army without any assurance or reinforcement from the Portuguese, and none were forthcoming. These developments might explain why sometime during 1632 and 1633, Conho decided to free Nzinga's sister, Kambu. If Conho thought that her release would appease Nzinga, he was mistakenly wrong. Yeah, you can't argue in the chat, you silly. Nzinga's troop continued to batter Hari, and a small number of people still loyal to him. In 1634, as news of a devastation wrought by Nzinga and other Mbangala bands operating in Ndongo continued unabated, officials in Luanda and Lisbon began to discuss in earnest what to do about Nzinga. With the governor still preoccupied by the Dutch threat for them sea, the Sobas in the regions near Luanda largely intimidated into submission. However, they could not muster the necessary manpower to move against her. She bossed up on them. So now she stopped your slave trade. She controls your slave routes. She is putting a dent in your economy. You can't even rule as governor in your area. The lands that y'all took from her, she is slowly gaining progress back. She at y'all doorstep with the smoke, and you hand over one of her sisters, and that still don't even stop her. And now you ain't even got the manpower to move against her. So while the Portuguese contemplated this dire situation on both fronts, and Nzinga spent most of 1634 and 1635 consolidating her positions in Mataba, not only did she face opposition from followers of the deceased former queen in Mwango, but she also needed to deal with her former ally, Kasa. While she was making war against Ndongo, Kasa had attacked Mataba with a large army. Only her quick return and determined resistance forced him to withdraw. By 1635, Nzinga was firmly in control and was leading her forces in persistent attacks against Angola Hari and the Sobas who lived near Mbaka and had remained loyal vassals to the Portuguese king. In 1636, these attacks had destabilized the area that the Portuguese could no longer ignore Nzinga's presence, and the newly installed governor, Francisco de Vancales da Cunha, ordered 2 infantry companies to Mbaka. Setting up in the same area of Lucala River where Portuguese forces traditionally camped, the companies did not engage in battle with Nzinga, but were positioned to move immediately if she attacked. Nzinga had no intention on fighting a conventional war against the Portuguese, and she kept her forces out of range of their guns. It would not be too long before the situation would turn into Nzinga's favor, as Dutch incursions in the south coastal port of Bengalu once again distracted Portuguese attention from her and Ndongo. The governor's focus was now fixed on fortifying Luanda and the coastal regions. Even while disrupting the slave trade, and making it difficult for Angola Hari to perform his duties as a Portugal vassal. And Nzinga was looking for ways to come to terms with the Portuguese. Ever want to use diplomacy, even as she pursued military options, and Nzinga started by reaching out to the Jesuits. You ain't say she stopped the slave trade. You ain't say none of the stuff that we being saying right now. In 1637, she went on an official gift of ivory and slaves to the College of Luanda as an indication of her willingness to begin a diplomatic alliance. They rebuffed her overtures, rejected her presence, and pointed out her superiors and that she was too corrupt for them to have any kind of relationship. They described her as a queen dedicated to the most horrendous customs and someone whose appetizing meal was their hearts and boys and the breasts of girls. It's possible that Nzinga's overture was sincere rather than being simply a political ploy. After conquest of Mataba, she had broken off her relationship with Casa, and there is a reason to believe that she may have been thinking of giving up Mbangala lifestyle in the light of her success in recruiting Mbandus, many of whom were not enthusiastic about the Mbangala customs they were required to follow. This was a missed opportunity on the part of the Jesuits, and it would be more than a decade before Nzinga would again seek relations through a religious route. Nzinga's army continued to operate in around the Ndongo and Mbaka around October 1639 when the governor, Pedro Cesar de Menezes, appeared in Luanda with 300 troops. The arrival of this well-armed governor immediately altered Nzinga's strategy. Menezes imposed order in a manner that the local population had not seen since de Souza had become governor after 15 years. Shortly after settling in, Menezes sent a message to Nzinga that addressed several issues he had hoped to resolve, including the return of the Portuguese vassals and slaves who had fled Nzinga's lands. Nzinga, aware of the large number of soldiers that Menezes had brought, but eager to capitalize on a political opportunity, which may allow her to gain control of Ndongo, responded positive to Menezes' letter, sending ambassadors to Luanda along with gifts of slaves to the governor, the bishop, and other officials. In a letter, she indicated that she had cooperated with Menezes' command and turned over the Portuguese emissary the slaves he claimed by the Portuguese. Now remember, these people that they're calling slaves are the people that ran away from the Portuguese. The Portuguese are saying those are our slaves. These people are like, no, we are Mbandu. We Mbangala. We all these other people around here. She gives some back. These slaves, unlike those she sent as gifts, however, were reportedly so old and decrepit that many of them could not recall the names of their former masters. Menezes agreed to Nzinga's proposal. He immediately nominated a respected Luanda resident named Jasper Madaro as a priest and called here to visit her. The two brought complementary skills to the table, and they began to negotiate with Queen Nzinga. So there was a peace treaty that would be orchestrated to be signed somewhere between 1639 and 1640. The party then traveled to Nzinga's court in Mataba, where they hoped to have better success with Nzinga. After all, had embraced Christianity once before. Nzinga entertained the visitors lavishly and carefully studying the terms of the agreement that Borges had brought. She began to speak. Nzinga argued that her power was based on the reputation she had gained not only in the successful wars she had fought, but also among the Mbangala, and asserted that she would not give up the ways she had learned from them. She recalled her baptism in Luanda and her exposure to Catholicism, but pointed out that the Portuguese who were now trying to attack her back to the church were the same people who had given her the reason to leave it in the first place. Responding to Borges, suggesting that she should stop making wars against the Portuguese and live in peace and accept the hand of friendship of the governor had extended, she acknowledged that the Portuguese were powerful and respected enemies and noted that she would be honored to join in an alliance with the Portuguese crown. But she returned to the issue on her rights to Ndongo, asserting that only through careful judicial process of war could there be any resolution of Portuguese claims to the provinces which her ancestors had already possessed peacefully. His discussions with Nzinga at a stalemate, Borges departed, leaving Father Colho to convince her to renounce Mbangala practices. At this point, Nzinga and one of her generals apparently decided to express their disapproval with the Portuguese overtures in appointed ways. Somehow, presumably, Nzinga's court gave Borges a dose of poison, and by the time he had arrived back to Ndongo, he fell deathly ill. So they done poisoned the voice for the dude. So he only survived because of a quick intervention from Hari's physicians, who administered the necessary antidote. When the governor and officials heard of the treachery, which they assumed Nzinga had perpetrated, they immediately voted to launch military action against her. But other events took precedence. As we all know, the Dutch conquest of Luanda in 41 derailed any plans of them moving on Nzinga. So her alliance to the Dutch was pretty much a ploy or a plot to distract. So when the Portuguese would become overwhelmed with the Dutch, she would seek the opportunity to make headway in places that they couldn't protect or defend. Nzinga's encounter with Borges and the Father Colho sheds some light on the development of a leadership style that she would employ from that point on. She refused to allow the children to be baptized, yet she relied on and welcomed his Christian prayers and blessings. As time went on, she would impose on her followers new, even more elaborate religious ideas and rituals. It appears that Nzinga had become an expert at manipulating religious ideology and rituals to maintain power. She knew exactly what she needed to do to retain control over her followers. The arbitrary cruelty she exacted against those who convened in the Njinga's laws or against enemies who had restricted her demands would sometimes resemble the actions of a deranged tyrant rather than those of an aggrieved ruler seeking to regain the kingdom that had been unjustly taken from her, were necessary to rebuild her power base. As far as her allegiances with the Portuguese in 1641, a new player arrived in Central Africa. The Dutch, comprising 22 ships, 2,000 soldiers from the Netherlands and elsewhere in Europe, and Native Americans from Brazil sailed to Luanda on April the 20th. The city was soon captured, and Nzinga was ecstatic when she received the news from the Dutch invasion and held many celebrations even before sending her ambassador to propose an alliance. Her aims, of course, differed fundamentally from the Dutch. When she was determined to expel the Portuguese, regain the ancestral lands, and become the most powerful African ruler in the region, the Dutch were mainly interested in having a reliable source of ding, 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 slaves for supplying northeastern Brazil, which they had conquered from the Portuguese in 1630. Nzinga was not only an African ruler in the region to welcome the Dutch, however, and her plan to build a Dutch-African coalition and oppose Portuguese would depend on her skills at dealing with another major Central African contender, the Kingdom of Congo. The Congo would prove her greatest ally, but also posed a major threat to her goal. Where you at, Cheryl? This is what you wanted to hear. You can't run now. In 1622, when Nzinga began the quest to establish Ndongo autonomy, kings of Congos were claiming Ndongo as a vessel. Congo rulers had long envisioned a time that they would reassert political dominance over Ndongo and the other regions of Portuguese had conquered. In fact, in 1622, Pedro II of Congo had written to the Estates in General in Amsterdam, inviting the group to send troops from the Congo Dutch military alliance to attack the Portuguese of Angola. When the Dutch finally did invade Luanda in 1641, Congo then ruler King Garcia II immediately confiscated goods and slaves from the Portuguese merchants in the capital of El Salvador and forced them to leave. But let's move forward. To create a successful coalition for Nzinga, would also have to bring on board the many Mbandu leaders who, although opposed to the Portuguese, had no intention of becoming Mbangalas or being their subjects. Many of these leaders welcomed the Dutch, providing them with local assistance and intelligence. The Portuguese were aware of the dire political consequences and any kind of Dutch Mbandu alliance, especially among the seasoned and loyal Calambes, who had been so crucial to Portuguese military success in the interior. One such soldier defended Mbandu collaborations with the Dutch by arguing that they were soldiers of fortune who had wives to feed and whom, moreover, were offended by the bad treatment they received from the Portuguese in front of their wives and children who were nearby. The Dutch were not surprised when Nzinga ambassadors arrived in Luanda in 1641 in November. 7 months into conquest, they had already collected intelligence on potential allies among the local rulers and identified a certain woman called Nzinga, with whom the Portuguese had never had peace, neither friendship as they have with other inhabitants. The ambassadors had committed to memory the entire text of Nzinga's message and recited it to Pierre Mortimer, the Dutch West Indian Company representative in Angola. They began by expressing the joy the Queen felt about the progress of the Dutch victory and emphasized her interest in trading with them, although Mortimer noted that they did not quite know what to make of those savages and their queen, who did not have anyone who knew how to read and write. He sensed that the relationship would benefit the company since Nzinga had indicated her willingness to trade with them, and this was something she had never voluntarily done with the Portuguese. Mortimer welcomed Nzinga's initiative, and it promised to enhance the company's major goal, to defeat the Catholic enemy Spain. Portugal and Spain were under one control in 1580 to 1640. In a protracted 30 years war that had spread from Northern Europe to Brazil and Angola. I'm going to say that again, a 30 years war that spread from Northern Europe to Brazil and now Angola. Remember, this is the slave trade that is transpiring. If you go to Brazil, you will see, well, not you necessarily don't even have to go, but you will see Portugal, Spain type people, and then you will see Dutch type. Well, not really the people, but like the name. There's some names up there that's more Dutchy and all of that, because the Portuguese and the Dutch, they even fought over that land over there in South America. So they beefing. They've been having a beef. Despite the savage appearance of Nzinga's ambassador, Mortimer immediately sent Dutch soldiers back to the court of Mataba with the envoys supporting her plans to broaden the alliances against the Portuguese. So here's the alliance with the Dutch. And at what cost would this come? Her whole plan was to get her kingdom back. It's been that way. She's been driven by that for 30-some years. It's 1640s now. So she's a few years older. And Nzinga was also putting other pieces of her plan in action. While the ambassadors were in Luanda, her troops were operating in East Mataba and Dongo and Bako and surrounding areas. Between April 1641 and 1642, the Portuguese governor was not only confronting Congo's forces who had joined the Dutch and invaded Portuguese occupied lands in the regions of the Bingo and the Dundee rivers, but he was also coming up against popular resistance among Portuguese slaves and free Mbandus who lived in the vicinity of the fields of Kambambi, Muxama, Masingano, and Mbaka. Governor Menez, realizing that he did not have enough ammunition or troops to confront these new threats, retreated to Masangano, who became his new base of operations. Angola Hari remained her main target, and her troops harassed him without fear of Portuguese counterattacks. At the same time, Nzinga spies in Dembo's region were passing on crucial information concerning the popular uprising that was going on there against the Portuguese. Portuguese troops suffered a terrific rout after they attacked the Dembo's ruler, Nambi and Dongo, and was able to repel them with the aid of 200 Dutch soldiers. Nzinga was them and bolded to move her 80,000 strong Colombos to the middle of Dembo's region while still maintaining her headquarters in Mataba. She bossed up now, bro. She using the Dutch. She using the Dutch. She captured people. She built more residences. She did this so people could stay and work. She featured common areas in which people could receive dignitaries. Although the move was more of a direct threat to Congo, she bordered the Dembo's region, and Nzinga had access to two closest allies. She had the Dutches and she had the Dembo Sabas. From this base, she had no difficulty intimidating any other Soba who dared to oppose her, particularly Ndambi, the only local ruler who had refused to join her. Nzinga attacked him with the Dutch support and set his capital on fire. And when he finally forced to submit, by the end of 1642, Nzinga had been able to compel all the Sobas to Dembo's region to recognize her as the authority, a feat that neither the Portuguese nor the Congo kings had ever managed to achieve. While Nzinga was extending her influence beyond the Mataba and reconquering and subordinated territories that had formerly paid tribute to Ndongo, the Portuguese were huddled into their four forts, Masangano, Muksama, Kambambi, and Mbaka, and some of the islands in Kwanzaa. Although they regularly ambushed Dutch forces and organized punitive expeditions against the Sobas who lived in the vicinity of the forts, most of the Sobas had switched their allegiances to Nzinga or the Dutch. At this point, Nzinga was meeting little direct resistance from the Portuguese. In January 1643, however, when the Dutch and Portuguese authorities signed a truce in Lisbon, the truce was meant to end the fighting and force the Portuguese to concede Luanda and certain other areas to the Dutch. In exchange, the Dutch would allow the Portuguese to return to their farms along with Bingo River and travel freely to Luanda to sell slaves and other goods. See that? Satisfied with the terms in the agreement, Mendes felt the situation had stabilized sufficiently to return with many of the Portuguese who had fled to Bingo region. By May, however, Dutch officials had broken the truce. They secretly sent troops to the areas the Portuguese had reoccupied, killing up to 40 soldiers and officials, taking more than 180 Portuguese prisoners, including the governor occupying the Portuguese forts in Bingo and Hango regions. Those Portuguese fortunate enough to survive the attack made their way back to Masangano. Tension would heat up again. Nzinga's troops continued to fight Hari. In 1643, he wrote to a new Portuguese king to complain about the precautions that he suffered at the hands of Nzinga, but Nzinga had more than Hari on her mind. After she learned about the Dutch-Portuguese truce, she became suspicious of the Dutch. Would they maintain her alliances with her? Indeed, there might be some truth to Cornega's contention that once Nzinga had used the Dutch alliance to defeat the Portuguese, she would then throw the Dutch out of Angola. It would have been foolhardy for Nzinga to believe that they were totally committed to her interests. Although she certainly didn't trust the Dutch completely, neither did she regard them as a major threat to her plans. The Portuguese were still of much greater concern. Nzinga may have believed that if she defeated the Portuguese and gained control over all the lands of Luanda and Mataba, she would be able to dictate the terms of the relationship with the Dutch in a way she had never been able to do with the Portuguese. Now, after the breakdown of the truce, Nzinga was relieved, believing that this signaled the possible demise of the Portuguese rule in Angola. While her troops occupied themselves with beating up on Hari, stopping short of engaging the Portuguese troops that had been stationed at the fort of Mbaka, Nzinga turned her attention to Congo to honor the King Garcia II. Nzinga dispatched most of her forces, some estimated 80,000 in Mangala soldiers, to Wandu in the eastern province of Congo. The ruler of the province of Wandu had revolted against Garcia, and Nzinga took the opportunity to send in her army. Although Garcia was partial to Nzinga's war against Portuguese, he was fearful Nzinga's expansionist activities, and such large attack against Wandu threatened her Congo lifestyle, or Congo itself. Nzinga's growing military power led to a slew of diplomatic initiatives by Congo, Portuguese, and Dutch. In September 1643, two of Garcia's ambassadors arrived in the Heywood to request Dutch military assistance. Although some reports suggest that Garcia needs troops to put down a rebellion in the coastal province of Soria, it is more likely that his fear of Nzinga led him to make that request. Officials in the Heywood thus rated friendships with Nzinga very high and cautioned local representatives not to take any action that would antagonize her. Instead of helping Garcia, they pressed local company officials to send a high-level embassy to Nzinga to persuade her to maintain her alliances with them. The Portuguese were even more concerned about Nzinga. For the time being, Nzinga had alliances with Congo and the Dutch, and they survived. But as she pursued plans to end Portuguese rule in the region, she knew that she could not count heavily on Congo's support. Nzinga was unquestionably making herself a key player whose decisions could change the political fortunes of the Portuguese, Dutch, and the Congolese. As a resentment of the Portuguese increased among the African population from 1644 to 46, Nzinga did not hesitate to capitalize on her growing military and diplomatic dominance. She strengthened her ties with Mbangala leaders and with Sobas who had joined her cause, and their troops attacked the population in the vicinity of Mboka and Pangu Dango, where many of her still loyal to the Portuguese. All she did was continue to harass Hari. She just kept on. It wouldn't stop. She was on his neck. If it wasn't him, it was the Portuguese. Nzinga immediately sent a detachment of her most experienced soldiers headed by Nzinga and Mano. When she learned that his forces had suffered heavy losses, he, meaning Hari, and failed to break through Portuguese ranks, Nzinga raised another detachment and led the charge herself. So her Dutch counterparts wasn't able to do certain things that needed to be done, so she went to go handle business after that. Meanwhile, she's still smacking up Hari. Nzinga emerged victorious, her troops having killed 70 Portuguese officers and soldiers, many Mbangala troops and numerous Kalambas and Sobas, and their soldiers were also wounded, killed, or captured. Nzinga had told her soldiers not to kill the Portuguese officers they captured, but they disregarded her and beheaded most of their captives. In the end, only 7 Portuguese captives remained alive, including the priest father Jeremoni Sakura, whom Nzinga imprisoned in her Colombo along with others. Nzinga's troops also captured Mbangala Kandango, a Portuguese ally, along with his concubine Comos, and some officials in the Colombo, as well as other Sobas in the Mbangala region who had supported the Portuguese. Let's move forward. It was this fearlessness that allowed Nzinga to instill dread in Africans and Europeans alike. She also was a careful strategist. One of her greatest successes from 1644 victory in Ngalame Keta was her capture of many Sobas of Mbaka who had accompanied the Portuguese forces, including a close blood relative named Angola Kanani. Kanani was the same Soba who had been forced to pay an annual tribute to the Portuguese for construction and upkeep for the Church of Our Lady of Assumption of Mbaka when Mendes Vasconcelos built the fort in 1619. That was 4 episodes ago. Although Angola Kanani had been a Portuguese vassal for all those years, and Nzinga treated him kindly, allowing him to remain in account and later at her court, bestowing on him the represented title of Mwani Limbobo. Because her aim was to build up Mbandu political institution in Mataba and the capture of the Sobas and Makatos and others who were connected to Mbandu ruling lineage, who had knowledge of the tradition already, was vital to her plans. Relying on what she remembered of Ndango in her youth, Nzinga was in the process of putting together an intricate court system in Mataba, even as she constructed Colombos when she was in the field. She spared no expense on the housing, clothing, and material objects for her inner circle. She built houses, local materials, all richly decorated with imported carpet, silks, cloths, and various patterns for herself. She's reestablishing the kingdom as she knew it when she was 10 years old. When she had moved her Colombo to the Dembos region in 1641, she painstakingly recreated the court system she had built at Mataba. Here she made some interesting additions to her temporary residence. And Nzinga used most of her income she received from the sale. And then here we go. Where you at, Sheffrin? You still here? I want to give you one. Because this is what you've been waiting on. It took us all the way to 1641 before we hear this. When she had moved her Colombo to Dembos region in 1641, she painstakingly recreated a court. You heard me say that. She built the accommodations for those soldiers and their families who had fought alongside her soldiers. The Portuguese looked on as all of this was suspicion. They believed that part of the Dutch strategy was to send the Dutch women to live within Nzinga Colombo so that the local population would see her giving orders to whites and would be more willing to join the campaign against the Portuguese. Several rulers from Dembos had residences in the camp, and it also served as prison for the Portuguese and Africans she captured. So the Africans she captured, here's what she did with them. She used most of the income she received from the sale of slaves she captured, the presents and tributes she received from the Dutch and her African allies, and the booty she took from her military campaigns to purchase guns, ammunitions, as well as cloths and jewels. I do believe we have Aunt making this argument at a crucial time in the conversation where people were just trying to not realize what Aunt was saying politically. This was to protect her kingdom. So she sold the people that she captured. These ain't our people. And one day we're going to bring in Sutek and he's going to explain what I'm saying right now. I'm going to leave that to him. I could do it, but you know what I mean? I don't want to step on his toes because this is another topic that he wants to dispel regarding your boy Sheffrin, who probably sleep right now. So now we know she sold some of the people she captured and purchased guns. There we know. And Nzinga's success in establishing political centers in both Mataba and Dembos region of her continuing military success was a cause of serious concern for King Jael in Portugal and Overseas Council. Although that council member still supported her rival, Hari, the focus now shifted to how to stop Nzinga. In the months following, in the months following Nzinga's 1444 rout of the Portuguese forces near Mbaka, the Portuguese situation had deteriorated. The army had laid low by the sickness of lack of military supplies, while the Nzinga forces operated seemingly everywhere with apparent impunity. Her troops roamed about, intimidating the Sobas and raiding in Angola Hari's lands. And she continued to make new allies with Sobas in the Dembos region. Moreover, her invasions and destructions of Wandu and the Eastern Congo had left the Congo king stunned. As New Year 1645 dawned, it became evident that something needed to be done. King Jael IV finally decided to nominate Francisco de Soto Mayer, the governor of Rio de Janeiro, to the post of Governor General of Angola. He ordered this dude to put together an army and reconquer Angola. Nzinga's successful campaigns against the Portuguese had made her the center of the discussion as plans unfolded for the invasion. He was set to arrive in Angola on the 25th of July in 1645 with 260 soldiers. In December, he submitted a report to the king that revealed how much Nzinga's military success had changed the political and military landscape in the region. He even noted that many Portuguese experienced in the local warfare, as well as 100 soldiers who had come earlier from Brazil as reinforcements, had been killed by Nzingas and Bengalas. Moreover, the Dutch conflict with the Portuguese had led to the Dutch banishing in Brazil hundreds of Portuguese who had participated in the earlier wars. Things didn't look too favorable when he pulled up with his 260 people. Yet, Sotomayor, like previous Portuguese governors, was initially reluctant to believe that Nzinga possessed the necessary military leadership skills and challenged Portuguese power in Angola. After 6 months laid up with his sick troops in Massagano, he still hesitated to move against her, blaming the delay on precautionary situations as the forts were badly climated, which was affecting the health of the soldiers, although eventually identifying Nzinga as the most powerful adversary that has ever existed in Ethiopia, Africa, noting that she was widely reputed to be the responsible for the Portuguese defeats and vowing to bring an end to the Iceland. He still blamed the Dutch for fomenting the situation and for indoctrinating Nzinga with anti-Portuguese sentiment. He admitted nevertheless that he was unable to confront Nzinga at the moment. She was too popular, too admired by the Africans for him to be able to get any of the local people to join in his campaign. So Sotomayor's arrival in Luanda, and Nzinga spies among her sister Fanji, when the Portuguese still held a prisoner in Masango, sent her regular updates about the Portuguese military plans. She was aware that Sotomayor had appointed Gaspar Borges, the ambassador who had visited Mataba in 1640, to lead a unified force against her. She was prepared now. She got people on the inside, people on the outside of the Portuguese rule. They telling her what's going down. She know what's coming, and she's prepared. They would suffer a major defeat and setback. Or would they? See, the Portuguese army succeeded in killing Kabata, most of his soldiers, when they moved in a particular region that they did. After receiving news of the defeat from the lucky few survivors, she ordered them to be beheaded. This defeat was disheartening for Nzinga and Bandu supporters, many of whom fled to Colombo and resubmitted themselves to the Portuguese. The shock of defeat created such a sense of forbearing and dread among those who remained that they spent several days performing tambos to Salim Mbandu rites that occurred at the funerals. Perhaps it was at this point that many Mbandus who had looked to Nzinga as a goddess realized that even she could not protect them from the Portuguese. This set her back. Her troops were soon attacking Sambo's lord to Portuguese whose populations were located some distance from Mbaka. She must have had some success since she spent a great number of slaves to the Dutch and asked for their help in moving against Mbaka. The Dutch were receptive to her overtures. Delegations had already been sent to Nzinga with the hopes of improving relations. Nzinga believed that despite this recent reversal, her forces still outnumbered the Portuguese, and the Dutch alliances would help her regain her military edge and improve her sagging prestige among the local poppers in population. Now, Nzinga's alliance with the Dutch and her military success against the Portuguese posed a very serious threat to it. The governor knew that he had to bring the war to Nzinga, Colombo, Sangas, and Covanda to prevent her from launching further attacks. Sotomayor's ambitions were grand. He planned to destroy Nzinga and defeat the Dutch at the same time. Nzinga would be shown no mercy. He ordered that upon her capture, she would be killed immediately. Sotomayor calculated that his troops stood a better chance of defeating Nzinga now while she was closer to Masango and not hundreds of miles in the interior at her court in Mataba. He recognized that he would neutralize the Dutch by fighting on two fronts: the river war, in which the vassals could block the Dutch from using the Kwanza River to bring supplies to Nzinga, and a land war in which the large Portuguese African force would head for her Colombo. In fact, Dutch and Kasama soldiers had recently attacked Portuguese troops in Maximur, which was only 30 miles from Masango, and the process had killed 80 soldiers and taken many captives. In 1646, Borges put together the largest land force Nzinga had ever faced and led the troops into what would be an epic battle, with equally epic goals of capturing and killing her, destroying her Colombo, and ending her alliance with the Dutch. Marching from Mbaka, Borges' troops crossed the river. They finally arrived to another river called Dande River from Nzinga River, where they eventually spotted Nzinga's Colombo from some nearby hills. Nzinga apparently had prepared for the invasion, building 3 bridges with the expectation that the Portuguese would use them to cross the Dande River. She calculated that the soldiers and carriers would make excellent targets for her bowmen, and the thousands of her soldiers had guns. But Borges would not allow Nzinga to dictate the conditions of the attack and dissuaded the leaders of his squadron from crossing the bridges. Instead, his army took a longer and more dangerous route, crossing at a deeper part of the river, arriving much closer to Nzinga's Colombo. But she also had prepared for a surprise attack. Having placed a perimeter of Colombo troops provided the ruler of Mbandi and the Bozo region, as well as the Dutch troops. She had ordered the soldiers to hide in tall bushes, and as soon as the Portuguese troops entered, they were supposed to set the bushes afire and prevent the Portuguese advance. That strategy failed, though. Borges was able to arrange the vanguards in such a way that the porters carrying the supplies were in the middle, and thus the supplies were protected. And the Portuguese troops nearby the camp, they had contended the Dutch soldiers and the troops led by feared General Nzinga and Mona, as well as Nzinga, Mwani, Nambambo, and other generals. Nzinga herself didn't stay out of the fray. Portuguese spies spotted her standing on a hill surrounded by her loyal corps of youthful Mbangala and dressed in her war outfit. The 2 sides fought a bloody battle, and from about 9 o'clock in the morning until late afternoon, when the Portuguese troops finally succeeded in breaking through Nzinga's defenses, Nzinga sent soldiers armed with guns to charge down the hill against the surging Portuguese. They failed to prevent the advance. The Dutch soldiers provided support, but they lacked heavy artillery, which would have been much more effective against the invaders. In the end, even with stiff resistance, the Dutch and Nzinga's and Bangalas and the Portuguese troops prevailed, and the vanguard reached Colombo. Nzinga had stationed various battalions of her army at a strategic distance. But once the Portuguese vanguard had broken the perimeter and entered, she realized that the small number of bodyguards would be incapable of defending it. She and her close associates made quick escape. Her sudden departure was obvious to the victors, the Portuguese who had met their resistance upon entering Colombo. They quickly discovered that Nzinga and her bodyguards had not even had the time to gather items from her residence or the residences of her officials. Everything was left behind, second the houses of Nzinga and her main advisors. They found 500 firearms and stores of rich fabrics and jewels. Nzinga Hari now claimed every possession in the house. Angola Hari. Coming away with many rich pieces of silk and other valuable things. It's getting busy. Here's why I pause for a second and cut on our sister and let her tell the story that everybody would like to hear. Give me a second and let me pull this thing back up. Y'all ain't fell asleep on me, have you? Hey, man, like the show, man. Share the show. Like the show. Share the show. Oh, yeah, let me put this on here real quick. I don't want no copyrights. So, real quick before we get into the video, the Portuguese were not surprised to discover in one of the residences an obvious pregnant Flemish woman. Through hysterical tears, she explained to the bewildered soldiers that her husband was among the group of Dutch troops who lived in the Colombo. The young woman did not know where her husband was, but thought that he might have died or abandoned her, fleeing with a couple sons. The presence of the Dutch soldiers with their families in Colombo was a clear indication that Nzinga had successfully made these Northern European foreigners her dependents. And this was key to the Portuguese. Of all the riches they amassed, of all the Colombo residents they captured or killed, by far most valuable to the Portuguese was Nzinga's sister Cambu. Remember, they still holding on to the sister. The Mbandu Columbus and soldiers allied with the Portuguese found her sitting in a regale, splendor with the 40 ladies in awaiting her, attending her. Seemingly unperturbed by the intrusion, Cambu remained so calm that the military chronicler Condornego, who fought in the campaign, later credited her deportment to majesty and sovereignty. Despite her horrific treatment, she was sexually abused during the night by the Mbandu soldiers who found her and held her captive. Cambu comported herself with the same royal dignity when she was handed over to Borges the following morning. To prepare for her appearance before the captain, Cambu had her ladies in a waiting dress her elegantly. They decorated her hands with gold rings, placed jewels all over her neck, and all of that stuff. They doused her up in lipstick. She was looking pretty. Well, Cambu was well over 60 years old. So you know how old Nzinga is. Her sister is over 60 years old at this time. She appeared much younger than Borges to avoid another situation where she might be assaulted by Portuguese guards. Took over a supervision, keeping her in the quarters until he could transfer her to Masangano. See, they were getting real at this time. They had finally made some headway with Nzinga, but we're going to find out a little bit more about her. And then I'm going to hit play. Nzinga's quick retreat had other serious repercussions. The Portuguese found letters written to Nzinga by her father's Fanji hidden under the altar in the small chapel she had built for the Catholic priests. The letters revealed much about Nzinga's spy network and put in Fanji's life at risk. During the more than 15 years of captivity, Fanji had fed Nzinga news about Portugal military operations. This explained why Nzinga had been able to move against the Portuguese with such ease. The Portuguese also discovered letters from Nzinga had received from her African allies, including Garcia of Congo. In one letter, Garcia congratulated Nzinga for her 1644 victory against the Portuguese. Congo would pay dearly for Garcia's alliance with Nzinga. Then Nzinga would face Dutch betrayal. Maybe. We don't know yet. But let the doctor speak.
And why is it? They want people to understand that they finally conquered. They got the better of Njinga because she died a Christian. They got the better of Njinga. So in the Azraelish, you can see, this was only done in the 1930s during the Salazar regime. You cannot understand early history without really looking at how history informs how your politics during the Salazar era, right? Autocratic. You have now the glorious Portugal being revived. When Portugal is the sick man of Europe, they'll have to revive. And Angola is a good place. They can't do it in Brazil. They lost Brazil. They could do it in Angola. So you have here the baptism and you have, the image of Njinga. This I took in a church in Angola. It's still preserved, by the way. One of the things we have to say about the Angolans is that they're preserving every inch of the Portuguese history. The Portuguese were there from 1575. They're preserving the history of the traditions, and they're preserving the resistance. So if you go to the new big museum, fascinating, a blend of that legacy. They do not just dismiss the European and destroy all the statues. All the big statue to Henry the Navigator, it's right there in that exhibit. So people in Angola could learn the true history. So I told you that Njinga is remembered, right? So Sacado, this image comes from Sacado. He's a Capuchin missionary working in Angola in the 20th century, hearing in the 1950s, hearing rumors about Njinga. He said every time I ask the people, they're telling me, giving me wrong information. Even then, they suspect that Europeans want to do something to undermine Njinga. And he goes to Santa Maria de Matamba, the capital, finds the tomb, takes this picture of it, and explains describes the protective layer that the people make around this. You had to take off your shoes and dress in a tanga. You can't go there with European clothes, okay? And this is 1957. And he said, this Njinga is still, the people remember Njinga. The Portuguese said, the people just forget Njinga. He said, no, because I went there, I measured this is for real. So I also said, I have to see this man if it's for real, and I'm studying Njinga. So here am I. I went to the same thing, and it gives me goosebumps. I said, oh my gosh, in the same location. And then the people carried me to other spaces in that protected area. They said, this is where the Capuchin is buried. And I know that 2 Capuchins had died not too long before Njinga's death in the city. And they have all these spaces that tells you where people. And they did the ritual to Njinga, asking her spirit to bless them still, the resistance. During the war, 1961, the MPLA takes up the resistance of Njinga. She becomes a model for modern resistance to colonialism. Now, it's not only in the traditions and in the 1950s. Njinga is alive and well in Angola today. Here, every time I go, I have to take out any of the new things on Njinga. In the villages, in the schools, this is a school that is called Njinga. This is in the area that Njinga was born, we think. This was built by the local community there. Here, Njinga is being commodified. Every place is a cup, tea, just everything. Cloth, coffee. She's all over. When I first went, this was what? In 2000, I think I bought this one in 2002. When I first went, just after the, Savimbi was killed. I was in Angola from 1979 to 1980. I went a couple times in the 90s, but the war was still going on. So when I got to Angola in 2003, they had built statues of Njinga. And again, I began to see how Njinga, the presence of Njinga in Angola. This is the Njinga that I love. You see me there? You see how short I am? Okay. So this is a massive statue to Njinga. They had it in the main thoroughfare going up from the marginal. Now it's in the museum. And everybody's saying, you better bring back Njinga's statue to the central place. Don't put Agostino Neto here and have Njinga in some museum. So they swear they're going to bring back Njinga in the central place. We hope. Things are still, because I did interviews with people right next to Njinga's statue. You're not supposed to do interviews at the time I went, but I did. And I said, and I have 120 something interviews, right? Not only there, I did it in different spaces I went over the years. What do you think of Njinga? Is she the mother of the nation? Well, she's for the Kimbundu, but we still have to, she did good things, but they should build a statue to every ruler, the traditional rulers. So there's still a debate, but every Angolan recognized the extraordinary woman that Njinga was.
Stop right there. Within a few months of her flight, Nzinga was planning a counterattack. This time, the Dutch were fully involved. Months after the rout, Nzinga's envoys had gone to Luanda with a large supply of slaves as a gift to the Dutch West Indian Company officials that demonstrated her firm commitment to their alliance. They responded accordingly, in April of 1647 when they sent an embassy led by Ferdinand van Chapelle, the company's commissioner for trade for Nzinga's Colombo. Now, the terms of the agreement called for the Estates General, the Princes of Orange and the West Indian Company on one hand, and Queen Nzinga on the other hand, to help each other with their people, counsel, and actions in order to exterminate the Portuguese. The pact directed Nzinga to send Luanda half of all the slaves she captured. It also stipulated that neither party could have dealings with the Portuguese and their allies without the prior knowledge of the other, and that each party would have to support the other party in an event of such negotiations. This was not the sort of agreement made during the height of colonial conquest in the late 19th century between European explorers and merchants scheming to deceive illiterate primitive African chiefs. It was a formal pact between equals. Now, between September and October 1647, the Dutch, the Sobers and Dembos, and Nzinga prepared for the general attack on the Portuguese. As plans for the attack developed, Nzinga's prestige improved considerably. This time, no one leaked the details of a preparation to the Portuguese. Perhaps they feared for their own lives and chose not to antagonize Nzinga's unnecessarily, or perhaps they believed in that this time Nzinga would be successful. Even Garcia II, with an inconsistent ally, calculated that he might join forces with her. The plan was that Garcia could raise an army comprising the troops from his province as well as from a couple people in Congo who lived in the island of Luanda. And Nzinga would lead her contingent of Mbala forces, and Nzinga, Mona, and others captains to lead their way to the Sobers and the Ilambala as part of the Ndongo and Mataba. And Nzinga was met up with the Dutch as they made their way from Luanda. This Dutch-African alliance would also include many rebel Sobers who were scattered throughout the region with their own soldiers. On October 25th, before the Dutch could assemble and appointed camp, however, the Portuguese army, numbering some 25,000 men divided into three groups, attacked one of the three fronts. Although the troops from Dembos made a valiant defense, succeeding in killing 300 Portuguese, it was Nzinga's arrival on the 27th of October that turned the tide. She had arrived 2 days before she was supposed to meet the rest of the Dutch army with her 4,000 men, half whom were battle-seasoned archers, along with the 70 Dutch soldiers under their own captain, who had been sent to join our forces. All told, the army numbered 300 Dutch, led by the Omen. 10,000 of them were Dembos and 4,000 in Bangala under Nzinga. They immediately marched to Cambu, an area north of Lucala River, where one of the Portuguese battalions under Borges had set up camp. They immediately launched a ferocious attack against Borges. The Portuguese were caught off guard by this attack and combined Dutch and Nzinga forces. Before the battle ended, more than 3,000 of the enemy lay dead, and the survivor mulatto and African soldiers and carriers fled in disarray. Borges himself was one of the victims, having suffered a fatal wound to his leg. Thousands were taken as prisoners. This victorious army then made their way to Masagano, and Nzinga had selected a Mano to lead the charge against the fort of Free Cambu, and he was able to get the local sailors to relay messages among the three armies and allow embassies to move easily between one location and the other. Indeed, many of the Sobers who had earlier rejected Nzinga suddenly demonstrated their loyalty by giving the Dutch free passages through their lands, allowing them to come within a quarter of a mile of Masango Fort. For 8 days, Nzinga forces, together with the Dutch, torched more than 200 villages of Sobers who had joined the Portuguese forces, and razed the surrounding farms and plantations on which 1,500 Portuguese who were living at the fort relied. The Portuguese spy who reported on advancing army described it as being so large it covered mountains and valleys. Yet the army failed to penetrate the defense of the fort. The Portuguese knew that should Masango fall, that would signal the end of their presence in the region. To avoid this colony, they had taken precautions to upgrade the fort's defense. Masagano had become the intelligence center for the Portuguese administrative and military officials and was a refuge for both African and Portuguese soldiers for the thousands of carriers who accompanied the army. The fort also housed priests, women, and children who had fled the Dutch-controlled regions near the Bengo and the Dande rivers. Some of them had the fact spill out of the fort and built villages near the Lucala River, which they protected with their trenches. By the time Nzinga and the Oman troops arrived, the fort was so overcrowded that houses had been destroyed to accommodate the artillery, and every man was armed, priests included. Nzinga's guerrilla did their utmost to break the fort's defense, but Oman's presence had little because he lacked the heavy artillery, so crucial to successful bombardment and well-constructed fort. So the Portuguese strategy of fighting both land and river war was critical here. They had blockades that they had erected at the Kwanzaa River, prevented the Dutch from bringing heavy artillery near enough to the fort to bombard. And Nzinga Amona, following Nzinga's order, attempted a different approach. Nzinga had him send troops to set fires in several locations to distract the Portuguese guards in hopes that some soldiers could force their way through. Even if only a few soldiers gained access to the fort, Nzinga hoped that they would determine the exact location of the arms and ammunitions, and not least all of their whereabouts of her sister. She was steadfast on trying to find her sister. They found one of the soldiers who was an ally to the Portuguese, but he insisted he wasn't an ally. They beheaded him. She didn't trust him. A dejected Nzinga, Mona, disappointed by his inability to break the Portuguese defense and unable to free Kambu, returned empty-handed to Nzinga, who remained a strategic location. In the meantime, Oman and the remaining Dutch troops headed back to Luanda, leaving Nzinga to reassess her position. But Nzinga, she kept fighting. She kept attacking the Portuguese regularly, and she didn't want to give up. She wanted her sister. One of the messages she sent on April in 1648 informed the Dutch that the Portuguese army, made up of 133 white soldiers and 280 specially trained soldiers armed with guns, was located a short distance from Marciano. They were on their way to Mboka to relieve the fort, and in their response, Nzinga's relentless attacks on all the Portuguese settlements in the region. The Dutch sent Major Thin Pitson and 300 soldiers along with some Africans to meet Nzinga at the camp where she had brought her own troops. This time, the Dutch made the trip in record time. They had secretly built a canal in the region of Muxamo that allowed them to bypass the heavy fortified fort. In August of 1648, 300 soldiers had taken their position alongside Nzinga, 4,000 troops of Mbako Plateau. There, the two armies awaited the Portuguese troops. When the African troops supporting the Portuguese finally appeared, Nzinga and Bangalas pounced on their hideouts, taking them totally by surprise. The attack was so sudden that the porters fled in panic, leaving their cargoes along the way. Although the Portuguese fought heroically, they had to divide their forces so that some of them could fight Nzinga and Bangala soldiers and the others the Dutch. They were too overwhelmed by the combination of artillery fire from Dutch guns and the ferocity of Nzingas and Bangalas. More than 100 Portuguese lost their lives, and only 11 remained alive to surrender. By the second week of August, the Dutch and Nzinga alliance seemed unstoppable. Nzinga was planning to move against Hari and Pongo Ndongo to remove him in his power and lead her troops to the Dutch allies to finish off the Portuguese who had clung to the Masiango. By this time, the people of Masiango had all lost communication with other forts and were destitute and starving. The survivors could only anticipate what was in store for them, if there was anything in store. Nzinga did not know, what she didn't know was that the Portuguese king had nominated a new governor, Salvador da Sá. And in June of 1647, he left Rio de Janeiro with an armada of 15 ships and 900 men. In 1648, Dessau and his armada thundered into Luanda's harbor, sending a shiver through the heart of the Dutch-directed Oman. Although he had no idea that the Dessau ship had sunk, he knew his numbers, that they weren't reassuring. He had barely 250 men under the arms and hoped that he would be able to hold off until the arrival of reinforcements under command of Pitsin, which was a major. But Desai had heard from some of the local fishermen that Pitsin was in the interior, so he immediately bombarded the city with canoes and sent negotiators with an ultimatum to Oman: give up Luanda in 3 days and receive safe conduct and face more bombardment. Oman sent word to Nzinga and Pitsin to dispatch troops to Luanda immediately. It took too long for that word to get to him. And on the 15th, Dessau he wasn't waiting any longer for the Dutch response. He bombarded the city and the forts, realizing that the Dessau forces were now joined with tumultuous groups of Portuguese who still lived in the city. Oman lost heart within a few days. So, and then he sued for peace. That's the betrayal part. Oman had gave in and he wanted peace. Now, Nzinga arriving to Pittsins in the late August was ignorant of the fact that before the arrival, Oman and other officials had signed a treaty of capitalization and turning over the positions in Angola to the Portuguese and agreeing to leave Luanda. She had positioned her troops a few miles outside Luanda, preparing to move them into the first sign of Pitsin, who had gone on ahead. No word came. Pitsin had arrived just in time to board the ships with the departing compatriots. When Nzinga couldn't miss, however, once she approached the city, was the Portuguese flag flying high above the fort of São Miguel. Nzinga was left to ponder if there were any Europeans left that she could trust. Once again, a major betrayal forced her to retreat back to her base in Mataba. She joined the rest of the Imbangala forces, who went on to carry out operations beyond Masagano. The last thing Nzinga wanted to do was to give her enemies the impression that she was crawling back to Mataba in defeat. Although she knew that she had returned to Mataba, where Kasenji had taken advantage of her long absences to make several incursions into the Eastern Kingdom, she wanted to demonstrate that she was still a major African power in the region. On September the 23rd, 1648, a little over 2 weeks after a retreat, Nzinga sent a contingent of her troops to invade Congo's eastern province of Wandu, where Imbangala had been operating. Nzinga might have sent her troops to help Garcia II discipline the still rebellious provincial ruler in a part of the agreement she had made with the Congo. She also had personal reasons for ordering the invasion. She wanted to avenge the death of some of her captains and soldiers who had died at the order of the ruler. She also wanted to punish him for having dismissed her as a mere woman who was cleverer with a distaff than a sword. Nzinga gave the order to destroy the province, unleash 50,000 troops on them, which included female units whose soldiers were integrated with a general army. The fighting began in early October and lasted 3 days, with the provincial ruler himself and 500 soldiers losing their lives. By the time another contingent of Nzinga's soldiers arrived in the city, lay in the ruins, two Spanish missionaries hid in the ruins of the church during the fighting. After the battle was over, Nzinga, who had remained some distance outside the city, sent 200 men, their heads decorated with various feathers, with bows and arrows flexed, to carry out mop-up operations. The church was a convenient place to start, since most of the residents had fled, carrying everything they could. After decorating the altar and taking vestments and religious items, they found the missionaries, whom they captured and abused physically and verbally, but did not kill. They also captured missionaries and Congo companion and interpreter Callisto Zelotes dos Reis Magos. He was a priest who would later join Nzinga's court. After the priests were taken before Nzinga, she looked at them standing before her temporary throne. Perhaps she was thinking about whether these priests were different from the other white man who over the years had betrayed her. Could she use them in the spiritual bond that she shared with them to obtain what she most desired, the freedom of her sister, and the end to Mbangala life that she had been forced to adopt to serve militarily, and in recognition of her right to rule an independent Ndongo Mataba state. Although Wandu campaign would not be the last war Nzinga fought, it created a turning point in her strategy from the time she met the two missionaries to the day of her death 15 years later. Nzinga was preoccupied with using diplomacy and spirituality to achieve the goals that had eluded her for so many years. This will conclude part 6 on the legacy of Nzinga. We will continue the additional parts. I think we got about 4 more pieces of information that we need to actually go through and deal with. So maybe how I want to say this. We won't finish it this week. Maybe by the end of next week or somewhere in the middle of the week after that, we actually will get that taken care of. We will have then laid out the whole legacy of Nzinga and her rule. And then we will begin to see what the naysayers have been saying all along was something they just weren't prepared to actually build on. So I'd like to appreciate everybody for tuning in to today's episode. If you haven't seen the other editions, you might want to catch up with those. I will say this. The noise continues tomorrow. The instigations and the antagonism will continue. It won't be scholarly. It will be a lot of claims. It will be a lot of looking for something to try to prove their point. You enjoy that if you want to. But if you like your brain cells and you like the train of thought that you actually have now, and you like the peace and quiet of being able to learn more about a subject matter that you may have seriously taken account of or fell in love with, or that you're interested in, or whatever the case may be, you'll ignore the noise. Until then, please go over the Same Tree, Different Branch Publishing. Same Tree, Different Branch Publishing. Pick up your copy of What SARS-CoV-2 Taught Me, written by me. Pick up your copy of, and the link is in the chat and it's also in the description. Pick up your copy of Spearmasters, an historical survey of the minds of African warrior scholars. Support our published works. Please support our published works. Get your books, get prepared, get armed. We're muting the noise. We're going to do this the right way. No matter what they say, I don't care what they say. Y'all can entertain. Y'all can go over there and be entertained by the ignorance. It's going to sound just like a barbershop. If you're a female and you have ever taken your son to get a haircut, that's what it sounds like over there. They forget that you sitting in the chair and it get really loud and it's a whole lot of commotion. And then when they realize that you right there after they done cussed and you and called degraded women so much right there, and then they realize, oh shit, she's still in here. When they realize that, then they kind of lower their tone a little bit. Or they just might continue their foolery. Either way, good luck on learning something. But please don't bring it to me because I don't care. There's nothing that Sheffrin could have read in the last 24 hours that's going to succumb to some type of evidence that would reject anything that has happened. You remember his 13,000 claim. I just read the case to you right then and there. Now, did she engage in some type of business with the Dutch? You heard me read that. I told you that. I told you about her dealings with the Dutch. She aligned with them. She paid them a tribute. of the people that she actually captured. Everybody should know who she captured. People that went against her and people that fought alongside and aligned themselves with the Portuguese that were now her enemies. I provided you a lot of context here. But most importantly, we're starting to see her rule, but she's later in life, yo. Her other sister, 60. They later in life. This woman been doing this for dang near 20 years at this point. She rules until she dies. She dies in her 70s. So we ain't got too far to go. But we had the accounts. We know more. Things are becoming a little bit more clearly. We know her childhood, from her childhood all the way to her adulthood and all the way to her resistant. I mean, she resisted the whole time. All she wanted to do is restore her kingdom back to what it was that she knew it as when she was a child. So again, if you haven't picked up your copy of What SARS-CoV-2 Taught Me, You Slipping, please click on the same Tree Different Branch Publishing and purchase your book today. If you haven't got Spill Masters Volume 4 from us, click on the website, go on the website, purchase your book. We're going to send them things out ASAP. They're going to be signed. You're going to get signed copies. Support us. We ain't going to ask you to cash app us or none of that. Get the book. Shout out to the people that I see right here in the chat right now, man. You know what I'm saying? There was a couple people that I guess while we were doing this build, there was a couple, well, somebody already got a pre-order. They pre-ordered the coloring book. And then we had another brother, I believe, get Kofi. Yep, Beautiful Lessons of Kamoya. That's what I thought. Yep. So shout out to y'all, man. The pre-orders are coming in on the coloring book. Beautiful Lessons of Kamoya is still out there. What SARS-CoV-2 is out there. Spill Masters Volume 4 is out there. Support our work, man. We doing this for you. Click on the links, get your copies. Let's go. Until next time.